We're taking a look at metabolic acidosis management today. We've got some clinical data here that really challenges some of the standard practices.
It really does. I mean, the acid-base profile is probably the most delicate tightrope in all of electrolyte management.
So let's just set the stage right away. A patient comes in, their serum bicarbonate level is just plummeting. Is the job simply to replace what's been lost? Are we just, filling the tank back up?
Absolutely not. And that's the classic trap. Metabolic acidosis is very rarely a solitary finding.
Yeah.
It's a complex diagnostic puzzle. So if you treat it as just a simple deficiency, you're almost guaranteed to miss the bigger picture.
So this is not just reacting to a low number on a lab panel.
Correct. The real mission here is to shift from that kind of reactive correction to proactive clinical reasoning. You have to look beyond the pH. You have to examine the underlying physiological disruptions. That's where you find out what's really going on with the patient.
Okay, so let's get into the diagnostic workup. You have a patient, there's an unexplained acid-base gap. Standard procedure, I think, for many, to go order more labs. Is that really the first move?
It shouldn't be. The very first move, before anything else, is medication reconciliation.
So you're saying the answer is often found right in the pharmacy cabinet?
Frequently, yes. It's an iatrogenic minefield. We often go hunting for some exotic primary malady, but the cause is right there on the med list.
Let's break down some of these hidden triggers then. Maybe start with diabetes management. We use sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors all the time, SGLT2 inhibitors. What's the specific risk there?
SGLT2 inhibitors are notorious for triggering euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis.
Euglycemic is the key word there.
It's incredibly deceptive. You end up with a severe ketoacidosis, but it's occurring despite near normal blood glucose levels.
And that has to delay the diagnosis significantly.
Precisely. You check the glucose, it looks fine, so you immediately rule out DKA, but all the while the acidosis is just running unchecked.
Okay, let's switch to neurology. What about anti-epileptic drugs?
For those, you really need to be watching for topiramate and zonisamide.
And what's the mechanism of action with those?
They act as carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. That specific mechanism leads directly to renal tubular acidosis or RTA.
Okay, so that's the brain. What about the heart? We have so many patients on cardioprotective agents like ACE inhibitors and ARBs.
Right. Angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors and angiotensin II receptor blockers. They're foundational drugs.
So what's the risk?
Well, they can precipitate a type 4 renal tubular acidosis.
Is that a universal risk for anyone who takes them?
No, not really. The risk is highest in patients with, say, existing diabetic nephropathy or advanced chronic kidney disease.
So you have to know their baseline renal function.
You absolutely have to know the renal baseline.
One more really common one, metformin.
Metformin is a staple, of course, but in the setting of critical illness or significant renal impairment, it can lead to a life-threatening lactic acidosis.
That's a very serious escalation.
It is. The KDIGO Society. That's kidney disease. Improving global outcomes, they actually recommend very close monitoring of acid-base status in chronic kidney disease populations specifically to avoid this outcome.
Okay, so we've covered the drug risks. Let's look at the patients themselves, specifically those with advanced chronic kidney disease. What's the statistical probability of metabolic acidosis in that group?
It's high. It's really high. Approximately 30% of patients with advanced chronic kidney disease will develop metabolic acidosis.
30%? That's almost 1 in 3. Why does that happen?
It's essentially a mechanical problem. As the glomerular filtration rate declines, the kidneys just lose capacity. They can't handle the net acid excretion anymore.
And they can't make bicarbonate.
They lose their ability to generate new bicarbonate.
Exactly. Is this risk distributed equally across all populations?
No, not at all. There are actually some very significant demographic disparities.
What does the data show on that?
We see a significantly higher incidence among Asian, Black, and Hispanic populations compared to non-Hispanic white patients.
That's a pretty stark intersection of pathology and demographics. Are there social determinants that are playing a role here?
It seems so. The data suggests that higher community education levels actually mitigate these risks.
Explain that connection for us.
Well, patient education itself seems to act as a clinical intervention. It directly impacts their acid-base stability.
I see.
When patients understand their condition, their diet, their medications, the outcomes improve. It's not just supportive care, it's genuinely therapeutic.
Let's talk about fluids for a minute. We're in an acute care setting. The go-to is 0.9% normal saline. It's the standard, but is it safe?
That brings us to what's called the normal saline paradox.
And the paradox is?
That large volume resuscitation with normal saline can actually trigger the exact condition you're trying to avoid.
So you're causing an acidosis by treating it.
Correct.
Okay, walk us through the physiological mechanism here. How does that happen?
It all comes down to the strong ion difference. When you infuse that much saline, you're causing a massive surge in chloride ions.
And the body has to compensate for that charge.
Exactly. To maintain electrical neutrality, the body is forced to displace bicarbonate.
And the result of that is?
Non-anion gap metabolic acidosis. NAGMA, sometimes called hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis.
So you have a patient who's getting worse, and the question becomes, is it their primary problem, or is it the saline you're pouring in?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's why you have to be able to differentiate.
Right. For high anion gap acidosis, we have the mnemonics, gold mark, or the older cat mud piles. What do we use for the non-anion gap kind?
For non-anion gap, you need to use the heart up P mnemonic.
Okay, let's run through heart up PM. What's H?
H is for hyperalimentation. So think total parenteral nutrition, TPN.
Yeah.
A is for adrenal insufficiency, or the drug acetazolamide. R is for renal tubular acidosis.
Yeah.
D covers both diarrhea and diuretics.
Yo.
U stands for ureteroenteric fistula.
And finally, P.
Pancreaticoenteric fistula.
So that really covers the key anatomical and drug-related causes.
It does. And recognizing this allows you to distinguish, is the patient getting worse because of a fistula, for example, or are they simply responding to the giant chloride load from your resuscitation?
Okay, let's talk about actually fixing it. Bicarbonate therapy. Should we be reaching for intravenous sodium bicarbonate for every low pH we see?
No, we really need to reject that one-size-fits-all approach. You have to differentiate between rescue therapy and maintenance therapy.
Let's start with the acute setting. When is rescue bicarb appropriate?
It's really reserved for severe acidemia.
And how do you define severe?
A pH of less than or equal to 7.21.
Is the pH the only criterion we should look at?
No, it's primarily used when there's also hemodynamic compromise or an acute kidney injury.
So if the pH is, say, 7.25 and the patient's stable, you'd hold off?
Generally, yes. The data really supports holding off unless those very specific criteria are met.
Okay, now let's switch to the chronic setting. Someone with chronic kidney disease. What's the goal for them?
The focus shifts entirely to maintenance. And here we have a very specific target.
What's the number?
We're aiming for a serum bicarbonate level of greater than or equal to 22 milliequivalents per liter.
22. Why that specific target? What does it do?
Two really important things. First, it helps prevent the progression of the chronic kidney disease itself. And second, it prevents the associated bone disease that comes with chronic acidosis.
So in these chronic cases, the bicarbonate is preserving both the organ and the skeleton.
Correct. It's a preventative therapy.
We've hit medications, we've hit fluids, demographics. What about lifestyle? Does diet play a role in all this?
Oh, absolutely. The dietary acid load is a major and often overlooked factor.
And what kind of diet constitutes a high acid load?
It's typically diets that are very high in animal protein and at the same time low in fruits and vegetables. This creates a really significant metabolic burden on the kidneys.
Who is the most vulnerable to this kind of dietary stress?
It's often older adults who also have that age-related decline in renal function.
Do the labs clearly show this state? Will you see it on a panel?
And that's the tricky part. Usually, no. Their serum values might appear to be well within the normal ranges.
So the labs look totally fine.
Right. But the patient is actually in a subclinical state of acidosis. Their kidneys just can't handle the required net acid excretion.
So the whole system is just maxed out, running at its limit.
Exactly. The patient exists in the state of chronic low-level stress. And you won't see it on the basic metabolic panel until the whole system finally tips over.
That really requires a high index of suspicion from the clinician.
It requires a more holistic assessment. You actually have to ask about their nutritional habits.
So let's try to bring all of this together. It feels like we're moving well beyond the basics here.
We are. We're moving beyond those foundational mnemonics like gold mark and heart up P. I mean, those are just tools.
Right.
True clinical expertise involves understanding the iatrogenic triggers, the fluid mechanics.
It's about the physics and the pharmacology of it all.
It is, yes.
So what's the final takeaway then for patient evaluation when you're standing at the bedside?
You have to ask yourself one question. Are you treating a lab value, or are you managing the complex physiological reality of this specific patient?
Don't just treat the number.
Treat the physiology.